In this webinar, we'll be discussing OKRs and change management and why it's important to understand change management when it comes to implementing your OKR program. Our learning objectives include why OKRs and why now, and why it's important for organizations to understand that question when implementing their OKR programs. We'll take a look at some statistics related to the industry, some interesting numbers around employee engagement and strategic alignment. We'll also take a look at some OKR definitions. We'll talk about psychological safety and why psychological safety is important when implementing a change management program like OKRs. And last but not least, we'll take a look at change management. We'll talk about the different types of change management as well as the 5 steps to change management. So let's get started. So why OKRs and why now? It's a great question, right? And it's an important question for organizations to understand when adopting the OKR framework. Because OKRs is a change management framework, it's important for organizations to understand that we're about to go through significant change. The way that we plan and strategize will change. The way that we track progress is going to change. Our roles and responsibilities are going to change. And the tools and the processes that we use will also change. But more importantly, we're now having conversations that are focused on outcomes. No longer are we tracking output, so common with project-based thinking. And that's the beauty of OKRs. If you're looking to adopt OKRs because Google did it or because you read a book, then you're probably adopting OKRs for the wrong reason. However, if you recently closed your Series A and you're looking to be the dominant player in the industry by 2024, and in order to do so, you need to scale your tech stack as well as your product, engineering, and marketing teams, then OKRs might be the framework for you. So let's take a look at some numbers. All right, so a 2022 Gallup survey went out to roughly 67,000 participants. And in that survey, there were 12 questions, and we'll take a look at those here in just a second. But based on responses from participants, they fell into one of 3 buckets. That was engaged, actively disengaged, or not engaged. So let's take a look at how the numbers break down. In our first group, we have the engaged group. That's roughly 32% of respondents. These are employees that are involved and enthusiastic about the work that they do. They're psychological owners, and they often are the employees that drive the organization forward, right? They're that small group of employees that do 80% of the work. In contrast, we have 18% that fall into that actively disengaged group. These are people that are just unhappy at work, right? Their needs aren't being met, and they're just unpleasant to be around. I think we've all worked with these people, and to be quite honest with you, you can't wait for them to get a new job and move on, right? Because they're just unpleasant to be around, and they bring the morale of the team down. And so 18% fall into that actively disengaged group. And then the last bucket here that we have is 50% that fall into that not engaged bucket. These are employees that they're showing up, they're doing their job, right? But they're just not invested in what they're doing. They're putting in their time, and they're doing the bare minimum, right? And this is 50% that fall into that not engaged group. And so the thing that's alarming about this study is that when you look at the actively disengaged group and the not engaged group, that's almost 70% of your workforce that falls into one of those categories, with that small minority of 32% that fall into engaged. So there's definitely some room for improvement in terms of engagement. So let's take a look at those questions. So like I said, there was 12 questions on the survey, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but the ones that I do have highlighted, I definitely want to call attention to. Starting with the yellow questions there, first one being, I know what is expected of me at work. That's an interesting question, and you'll see why in a couple of slides when we take a look at some project failure rates, right? So put a pin in that one in terms of I know what is expected of me at work. And then the other 3 that we have highlighted there, number 3, 8, and 12. Daniel Pink talks about mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And the theory is that if you pay people well enough, you take money off the table in terms of a motivator, right? And so what is left at that point? It's mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And so when we look at these questions here, number 3, for example, at work, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day, right? That's the autonomy piece of it, right? There's a good chance that I really enjoy doing what I do, right? And there's a good chance that I'm probably part of that 32% that is engaged, right? And so number 3 there, at work, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. Number 8, the mission or purpose of my company makes me feel my job is important. It's in the question, right? Purpose. And, the interesting thing is people can join any company that they want, but they join your company because they connect with your mission, your vision, and your purpose, right? And so number 8 there, mission and purpose. And then number 12 here, the last year I've had opportunities at work to learn and grow. That speaks to the mastery piece of it, right? There's a good chance that I'm supported by my leadership team, that my manager supports me, that I'm able to learn more about my craft and to take courses on improving my craft, learning new technologies and so forth, right? And so that's the mastery piece of it. Number 12 there, I've had opportunities to work, learn, and grow. And then the items highlighted in green here, I've included those in particular for those considering OKRs and performance management. A lot of organizations will adopt OKRs because they want to link their strategy to individual performance management, and that's a conversation for a whole other time, right? But if you are planning on doing that with your OKR program, you want to give consideration to CFRs, and that's conversation, feedback, and recognition. And that's what these items here, these questions that are highlighted in green represent, right? So in the last 7 days, I have received recognition or praise for doing a good job. Number 6, there is someone at work who encourages my development. And then number 11 here, in the last 6 months, someone at work has talked to me about my progress, right? So that's the feedback piece of it. And so if you are considering OKRs and performance management, you'll definitely want to take these things into consideration. So let's take a look at some more numbers. Okay, so a 2018 MIT Sloan survey found that of the percentage of leaders at each level in the organization who can list their company's top 3 priorities. And so when we look at the numbers here, 51% of our top team can name our company's top 3 priorities. This is our C-suite that can name the top 3 priorities, right? So 51%. And then we go down a layer, our senior execs, 22%. Can name the top 3 priorities for the company. And then unfortunately it gets progressively worse from there. Our middle managers are at 18%, and unfortunately our frontline supervisors are at 13%. These are our soldiers, right? These are our boots on the ground that can name the top 3 priorities, and unfortunately that's 13%, right? So, but let's take a look at some of the reasons for misalignment when it comes to strategy. Bullet 1 here, the C-suite often assumes everyone is on the same page. Yeah, that seems pretty evident here. 51% of our C-suite can name the top 3 priorities. The second bullet here, leadership teams often fail to agree on company-wide priorities. Again, 51% of our C-suite can name the company's top 3 priorities. And then our last bullet here, the sharpest decline occurs between leadership and direct reports, right? Again, going back to our soldiers with boots on the ground, unfortunately, that's a small percentage that can name the company's top 3 priorities. And I would think that if anyone should know the company's top 3 priorities, it should be our soldiers with boots on the ground. So let's take a look at some of those project failure numbers that I was talking about. Okay, so Statista.com sent out a survey to software developers worldwide, and essentially the question is why do software projects fail? And when you look at the responses here, the numbers are pretty interesting. 48% of respondents indicated that changing or poorly documented requirements are the reason for project failure. And it's interesting when we think back to the Gallup survey questions, right? Question number 1 was, I know what's expected of me at work, right? And so an interesting connection between knowing what is expected of me at work and having well-documented requirements, or in this case, poorly documented requirements that lead to project failure. 40% indicated that underfunding or under-resourced was the reason for project failure. poor team and organizational management at 37%, insufficient time allocated for testing at 32%, and developer churn or loss of key talent at 23%. What's interesting about that statistic is if we think back again to the Gallup survey, those that fall into that actively disengaged group, right, that 18%, it's not uncommon to have key talent that fall into that group, right? And when we think about some of the numbers around strategic alignment, 51% of our C-suite can name the top 3 priorities. It's not uncommon that we may have some dysfunction within the organization, and with that, unfortunately, you will have key talent that is going to find opportunities elsewhere, and they will leave your program. And that's unfortunate because 25% of your projects are failing because we can't keep talent, right? And then to wrap up the survey here, 22% indicated that misdelivery timelines and expectations are the reason for project failure. 21% time constraints and premature software releases. And then the last question there, 17% immature development tools and application platforms. So just some interesting numbers there on project failure. So now that we've had a chance to look at some interesting numbers, let's take a look at some OKR definitions. So objectives and key results. It's a change management framework used by organizations and teams to create consistency and alignment between strategy and execution. OKRs represent a committed effort by the organization to achieve the #1 goal in the company, right? So a couple of things about OKRs. First of all, they're transparent. It means they're public throughout the organization. Our company level OKRs as well as our team level OKRs are all public. This way everyone knows what everyone is working on, and we're all able to track progress in a transparent way. They're not a substitute for strategy, mission, and vision, right? So in order for OKRs to be effective, they need that strategy, right? We need to know where we're going 6 months, a year, 3 years from now, right? And that's in the form of our strategy. And OKRs anchor to that strategy and execute on that in small increments, right? So it's, again, not a substitute for strategy, mission, and vision. They require discipline and commitment. So they're not a set it and forget it type of framework, right? So they do require a regular cadence and meeting on a regular schedule, regular check-ins, and so on and so forth, right? So they do require that discipline and that commitment. They define what we say yes and no to, right? If the project doesn't support our OKRs, then why are we doing it, right? And so in terms of those projects, those pet projects that often sneak in and so forth, if they don't support the strategy, then why are we doing it? They do require us to quantify our hypotheses. So it's interesting how logic changes once you have to quantify something, right? And so at the end of the day, the projects that we work on, they are hypotheses, right? That we think that if we do X, Y, and Z, that A, B, and C is going to happen. But with this, we're now forced to quantify A, B, and C, right? We've put success metrics to that in the form of key results, right? And so they require us to quantify our hypotheses. And last but not least, they embrace autonomy and psychological safety. And we'll get into psychological safety here in a few slides, but it's important to note that. So you might be telling yourself, you know what, this is all fascinating stuff, but I still don't know what OKRs are. Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's take a look at some definitions. So here we have the objective, the key result, and initiatives, also known as tasks. When you think about the objective, though, you want to think of that as the heart, right? This is the qualitative goal that we want to achieve. By nature, it's ambitious and actionable by the team, meaning that we want them to be these moonshots, right? We want them to be ambitious, but we don't want them to be so ambitious that the team is unable to hit the goal. That defeats the purpose of OKRs, right? So we do want them to be ambitious, but definitely attainable by the team. They come in 2 flavors, aspirational or committed. Those aspirational OKRs, those are those moonshots that we're trying to hit, right? Those are the numbers that take us out of our comfort zone, right? That's the aspirational piece of OKRs. In contrast, we also have committed OKRs, right? These are OKRs that we have a level of certainty that we are going to hit. And if we don't hit these committed OKRs, well, then we might have bigger problems within our organization. So if we're unable to hit those committed OKRs, it's a perfect time to reflect on that particular process and why we were unsuccessful. in terms of the quantity of OKRs, you'll want to keep those around 2 to 3 per cycle, right? If you're more experienced with OKRs, then certainly you can adjust that. But if you're new to OKRs, you might even want to take the rule of thumb of maybe 1 to 2 OKRs. With OKRs, less is more, especially when you're adopting the framework and you're new to it, okay? An example here would be to provide an amazing customer onboarding experience. The qualitative statement in that is amazing, right? In terms of what is amazing to me is likely different than what is amazing to you, but that opens the conversation for you and I to discuss that, right? And by doing so, we can come to agreement on what amazing looks like, and we can start to put metrics around amazing and how we measure amazing, right? And that's where your key results come in. Your key results are the qualitative outcome that tells us that we got to our goal, right? But it's been thought through and through conversation, and we've identified these goals as a group, and we have numbers to support these key results, right? The emphasis with key results is on outcome over output. So going back to project-based thinking again, right? We're no longer focusing on output. We're now focusing on outcome because we've quantified outcome, right? And so with key results there too, you want to limit them 2 to 3 per cycle, 1 to 2 if you're new, right? Less is more. An example here would be to improve customer NPS by 8.5% from 4.3 to 4.7%. We've put some thought into these numbers here, and that's the beauty of OKRs, is that we've quantified these numbers here, and that we know in order to improve that NPS, we've got to go from 8.5% in order to improve those numbers. And how we do that is through our initiatives, also known as tasks, right? Think of the tasks as the hands, right? These are the things that we're going to do in order to influence that key result. And an example here would be to reduce the sign-up flow lag times, right? And the workflow. Perhaps with the onboarding experience currently, maybe we're seeing a high abandonment rate, right? Because customers are just, the workflow is taking too long and the system is laggy whenever I'm trying to sign up. And this is one of the things that we can do to improve that experience for the customer, there too, improving the customer NPS score, providing that amazing experience, right? So just a little bit there on objectives, key results, and initiatives. So let's wrap this up. We've got just a few more slides. We'll take a look at psychological safety. We've got a couple slides on change management, and then we've got a summary slide at the end here. So just a few more slides. Bear with me. We're almost done. So here was psychological safety. So Amy Edmondson is a Harvard Business School professor, and in 1999, I believe it was, she had published a paper on psychological safety. And in there, she concluded that psychological safety is a shared belief held by members of a team that it's okay to take risks, right? To express their ideas and concerns, to speak up with questions, and to admit mistakes without fear of negative consequences. And so when it comes to OKRs, psychological safety is important for all of these reasons, right? With OKRs, we are aspirational, right? We're ambitious, but these goals need to be attainable by the team, going back to the definition previously, right? And in order for us to be aspirational and to take these moonshots, right, we need that component of psychological safety. We need to know that it's okay to take these risks, right? And it's okay to admit these mistakes without fear of negative consequences. And so when it comes to psychological safety, that's definitely something that we want to evaluate as part of our OKR implementation, okay? So, and here we have a couple of examples of psychologically safe teams. They work together better as a team, right? They're more willing to experiment, again, going back to psychological safety. And they're more willing to report their mistakes and take risks, right? And that brings up a key point about the learning piece of OKRs, right? We're not going to hit our goals all the time. Trust me, we are not. And so in terms of reflecting on that, we want to take that opportunity and learn from what we could have done differently. And we include that as part of our retrospective process, right, within the OKR framework. And so a couple of other things here, similar levels of psychological safety compared to teams without, right? And so when we have that inherent within our team, it's kind of, we know as how we operate as a team when it comes to psychological safety. When that's absent from other teams, you can see that. And so a couple of things with non-psychological safe teams. Turnover and burnout, right? This is that 18% of actively disengaged group, right? It's the 23% failure rate when it comes to software projects, right? That's a component of having an organization where teams don't feel psychologically safe, right? It leads to turnover and burnout. And there too, it has the impact on the organizational performance, right? 24% of projects failing because of turnover, right? And so just a few definitions there on psychological safety. Okay, so let's do a quick learning recap. Okay, so what did we learn today? We looked at why OKRs and why now, right? And we found some interesting numbers around employee engagement. 32% of employees are engaged at work, right? Where that other 68% fall into actively disengaged or just not engaged, right? 51% of C-suite leaders know their top 3 company priorities. And it gets even worse when we get down to our frontline leads, right? The 13% know what our top 3 priorities are, right? So definitely room for improvement there. And then 23% of project failures due to developer churn or loss of key talent, right? And we connected that dot in a number of different areas, including those that fall into that group of actively disengaged, as well as those that may fall into that category where their teams don't feel psychologically safe, right? And so we looked at the project failure rates and found that 23%, right, failed due to developer churn and loss of key talent, and we can attribute that to a lack of psychological safety. We looked at OKR definitions, right, and we identified that it's a change management framework, and we dug deeper into that in terms of what is change management and why is psychological safety important when it comes to adopting a change management framework. And then we wrapped it up with the 5 steps of change management, right? And so that concludes our webinar. I hope it was helpful for you. Thank you for your time, I guess. Yeah.